Let me ask you something. Picture yourself at 80 years old. Not the 80 you've been told to expect. Not the slow shuffle, the cane, the constant ache in your knees, the gradual surrender of everything you love doing. I want you to picture a different version. You're getting up off the floor without help. You're carrying groceries. You're playing with your grandchildren. You're hiking, maybe not Everest, but a real trail with real elevation, and you're doing it because your body actually lets you. Now here's the question I want you to sit with for the next few minutes. Are you training for that version of yourself right now? Because if you're over 40 and you're not doing serious, intentional strength training, I have to be honest with you, the odds are stacking against that vision. Every single day you're not in the gym. I've spent years obsessing over this. I've read the literature, I've worked with patients, I've looked at what the data actually says about how we age, what kills us, what robs us of function, and what we can do to genuinely push back. And the single most powerful, most underappreciated, most criminally underutilized intervention I have found, not a supplement, not a drug, not a fasting protocol, is strength training. Specifically, the right kind of strength training done consistently, starting now with the goal of keeping you functional, independent, and thriving well into your later decades. That is what this video is about. So let's get into it. Let's talk about why strength training is not optional after 40, what actually happens to your body if you ignore it, and then I'm going to walk you through the full framework. The principles, the structure, the movements, the progression model, everything you need to build a routine that is genuinely built for longevity, not bodybuilding, not powerlifting, not chasing aesthetics, although that may come as a side effect. We're talking about training for what I call the marginal decade, the last 10 or so years of your life, and making sure those years look as much like your best decades as possible. Here's where we have to start: muscle mass. Most people have no idea how aggressively they are losing it. Starting somewhere around your mid-30s and accelerating significantly after 40, you begin losing between 3 and 8% of your muscle mass per decade, and that number gets worse as you get older. After 60, it can accelerate further. We call this sarcopenia, the age-related loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength, and the consequences of it are not subtle. They are catastrophic. We're talking about falls, which are one of the leading causes of injury-related death in older adults. We're talking about metabolic dysfunction because muscle is metabolically active tissue that plays a massive role in glucose regulation. We're talking about frailty, which in the clinical literature is one of the strongest predictors of mortality, hospitalization, and loss of independence. And here is what makes this so urgent. You are not just losing muscle tissue, you are losing capacity. You are losing the buffer that stands between you and the version of aging that most people take for granted as inevitable. But here is the part that should make you optimistic, not defeated. Sarcopenia is not inevitable. It is not some locked-in biological destiny that you are powerless against. The research on this is unambiguous. Strength training done consistently can reverse muscle loss. It can rebuild what's been lost. And in older populations, I'm talking 60s, 70s, even 80s, studies have shown meaningful gains in muscle mass, strength, and physical function in response to resistance training. This is not a young person's intervention. It works at every age. The biology of muscle adaptation does not turn off when you hit a certain birthday. What changes is the context, the approach, and the urgency. So when I say strength training for longevity, I want you to understand what I mean precisely. I'm not talking about what most people picture when they hear working out. I'm not talking about 3 sets of 10 on a chest press machine, calling it a day, and feeling good about yourself. I'm talking about a structured, progressive, intentional resistance training program that is built around the movements and capacities that matter most for long-term functional independence. I'm talking about training that takes seriously the idea that your 80-year-old self is counting on the decisions you make today. That's the lens through which I want you to think about everything I'm about to tell you. Let's talk about the foundational principles first. Because if you don't have the principles right, the specific exercises don't matter much. The first principle is progressive overload. Your muscles adapt to stress. When you apply a load that exceeds what they're accustomed to, they rebuild stronger. If you don't progressively increase the demand over time, they stop adapting. This seems obvious, but the majority of people who work out regularly are not applying this principle. They're doing the same weights, the same reps, the same movements week after week, and they wonder why they're not getting stronger. Progressive overload doesn't mean adding weight every single session, though sometimes it does. It means systematically, intentionally making the training stimulus harder over time. More weight, more volume, better range of motion, less rest, more tension. There are many variables, but the principle is non-negotiable. The second principle is specificity, and this is where longevity training diverges from general fitness. When I'm designing a training program for someone who wants to be functional and independent at 80, I'm not thinking about aesthetics first. I'm thinking about what physical capacities are most predictive of quality of life and survival in later decades, and the research points clearly to a handful of things: grip strength, lower body strength, hip hinge capacity, single leg stability, the ability to get up from the floor, and the ability to carry load. These are not random. Grip strength, for example, is one of the most robust predictors of all cause mortality in the literature. It's a proxy for overall musculoskeletal health. Lower body strength is directly tied to fall prevention, functional independence, and metabolic health. The ability to hinge at the hip, to pick something up off the floor without destroying your back. That's not just a gym skill, that's a life skill. So the principle of specificity tells us to train the things that matter most for the life we want to live. The third principle is consistency over intensity. This one is particularly important for people over 40. There is a temptation, especially when you're motivated and starting fresh, to go hard right out of the gate, to train 5 days a week, to push to failure on every set, to wake up so sore you can barely walk, and take that as a sign that you did something right. I want to challenge that mentality directly. In the context of longevity training, the most dangerous thing is injury, not because injury is the end of the world, but because injury interrupts consistency, and consistency is the variable that matters most over a 20 or 30-year time horizon. A moderate program you can sustain for years is worth 10 times more than an aggressive program that sidelines you with a torn rotator cuff or a herniated disc after 6 weeks. Train hard enough to drive adaptation. Train smart enough to never stop. The fourth principle, and this one I feel strongly about, is that you need to train in a way that builds what I call structural resilience. This means joint integrity, tendon health, connective tissue strength. Muscle adapts faster than tendons and ligaments. This is why so many people get hurt when they ramp up training too quickly. You can build muscular strength faster than your connective tissue can keep up, and then something gives. After 40, you have to be especially mindful of this. It means warming up properly. It means not skipping the slow, controlled, full range of motion work in favor of just piling on weight. It means respecting the signals your body gives you, not the soreness after a hard session, which is normal, but the sharp pain, the joint discomfort, the nagging ache that doesn't go away. Those signals matter. Now let's get into the structure of the actual routine. I want to give you a framework that is grounded in these principles and that you can adapt to your own schedule, your own equipment access, and your own starting point. For most people over 40 who are prioritizing longevity, I recommend training 3 to 4 days per week. 3 days is genuinely enough to drive meaningful adaptation if those 3 days are well structured and you're applying progressive overload. 4 days gives you more volume and slightly faster progress, but it also raises the recovery demand. If you're sleeping well, managing stress, and eating enough protein, we'll come back to protein, 4 days is very sustainable. If your life is chaotic, your sleep is inconsistent, and you're under significant psychological stress, 3 days might actually be smarter because recovery is where the adaptation happens. Training is just the stimulus. In terms of how to structure those training days, I favor a lower upper split or a full body approach depending on frequency. If you're training 3 days a week, full body sessions make a lot of sense because you're hitting each muscle group more frequently, which is important for muscle protein synthesis and adaptation. If you're going 4 days, a lowered upper split, 2 lower body days, 2 upper body days, works really well and gives you better recovery between sessions targeting the same muscle groups. Let me walk you through what these sessions should actually look like. Every session should begin with movement preparation, not 5 minutes on a stationary bike staring at your phone. I'm talking about targeted mobility work and activation that gets the joints moving through their full range, wakes up the muscles you're about to use, and gives your nervous system a heads up that real work is coming. For a lower body session, this might look like hip circles, leg swings, a few minutes of ankle mobility work, and some glute activation with a band. For upper body, thoracic spine rotation, shoulder CRs, controlled articular rotations, and some scapular work. This is not wasted time. This is the work that keeps you doing the work for decades. The primary lower body movements I want you to build your program around are the squat pattern and the hip hinge pattern. These are not just exercises, they are fundamental human movement patterns. The squat, whether that's a goblet squat, a barbell back squat, a front squat, or a Bulgarian split squat, trains the ability to load the lower body through knee flexion, which is directly tied to the kind of strength you need to get up from a chair, climb stairs, and rise from the floor. The hip hinge, the deadlift in its many variations, trains the posterior chain, the glutes, hamstrings, and lower back, and it trains the pattern of loading a bent spine under control, which is one of the most important things you can do to protect your back for life. For people over 40, I want to make a specific recommendation here. Don't be dogmatic about barbell work. A trap bar deadlift is an excellent, joint-friendly alternative to the conventional barbell deadlift that places less shear force on the lumbar spine. Romanian deadlifts are phenomenal for posterior chain development. Goblet squats with a kettlebell are a fantastic way to build squat mechanics and load the pattern without the spinal loading of a barbell back squat. These are not inferior options. They are intelligent options that honor the reality of your joints and your training history. use the tool that lets you train hard, stay safe, and keep coming back. Alongside the primary patterns, you absolutely need to include single leg work. This is non-negotiable for longevity. Single leg exercises, step-ups, split squats, Bulgarian split squats, single leg Romanian deadlifts, train unilateral strength and stability, which is what actually keeps you upright when you're walking on an uneven surface, or stepping off a curb, or catching yourself before a fall. Bilateral strength is important, but unilateral capacity is what life actually demands. And there's a practical benefit here too. Single leg work tends to reveal and correct the strength imbalances that exist between sides, which, if left unaddressed, set you up for injury over time. On upper body days, the primary movement patterns are push, pull, and horizontal push. Think dumbbell bench press or push-up variations. Vertical push, overhead press, though I want to flag that for people with shoulder issues, a landmine press or a neutral grip dumbbell press can be much more shoulder-friendly. Horizontal pull, rows in all their variations, seated cable rows, dumbbell rows, chest-supported rows, barbell rows. This is one of the most important movement patterns for postural health and shoulder longevity, especially if you spend long hours sitting at a desk. Vertical pull, lat pull-downs and pull-up variations. Building pulling strength is essential and massively underemphasized in most people's training. And then there are carries, loaded carries, farmer's carries, suitcase carries, rack carries are one of the most underrated exercises in existence for longevity. Carrying load through space trains grip, core stability, shoulder integrity, and gait mechanics simultaneously. It's functional in the most literal sense. It mirrors exactly what life asks of you when you carry groceries, luggage, a bag of mulch, a grandchild. Include them. They're simple, they're safe, and they're extraordinarily effective. Now let's talk about sets, reps, and loading. I want to give you a framework rather than a rigid prescription, because you need to be able to adjust based on your experience level and how you're recovering. For building strength, the kind of strength that protects your joints, supports your metabolism, and creates that reserve capacity I keep talking about, you generally want to be working in the range of 3 to 5 sets of somewhere between 5 and 12 reps per exercise, using loads that are genuinely challenging. Challenging means that if you were asked to do 1 or 2 more reps at the end of a set, you could, but it would require real effort. We call this proximity to failure, and for strength and hypertrophy, you generally want to be leaving somewhere between 0 and 3 reps in reserve. If the weight feels light and you finish your set feeling like you barely worked, that is not going to drive adaptation. This is where I want to talk about the concept of the minimum effective dose. Especially early in your training, you don't need a lot of volume to see results. The research on resistance training in untrained or undertrained individuals is actually really encouraging in this regard. Even relatively low volumes of training produce significant improvements in strength and muscle mass. The goal is not to do as much as possible. The goal is to do as little as necessary to keep driving adaptation, and then increase that dose intelligently over time as you get stronger and your recovery capacity improves. More is not always better. More is better only when you can recover from it. Speaking of recovery, let's talk about protein, because I cannot have this conversation without addressing it. Muscle protein synthesis, the process by which your body actually builds new muscle tissue, requires an adequate supply of protein. And after 40, this becomes more important, not less, because of a phenomenon called anabolic resistance, where older muscle tissue becomes somewhat less sensitive to the anabolic signal of protein. What this means practically is that you need more dietary protein as you age, not less. The recommendation I work with for active individuals over 40 who are engaged in strength training is roughly 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day, or about 2.2 grams per kilogram. This is higher than the RDA. The RDA for protein was not designed to optimize muscle retention in aging adults doing resistance training. It was designed to prevent deficiency in sedentary people. It is not a target. It's a floor. And for our purposes, it's an inadequate one. Distribute that protein across your meals rather than eating most of it in one sitting. Muscle protein synthesis has what we call a leucine threshold. You need a sufficient dose of the amino acid leucine to fully trigger the anabolic response. This is why protein quality matters and why per meal distribution matters. Aim for somewhere in the range of 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal, prioritizing high-quality complete protein sources, animal proteins, dairy, eggs. Though high-quality plant proteins can also work with some planning and attention to completeness. And if you're wondering about timing, yes, having protein around your training session is useful, but the research suggests that total daily protein intake is far more important than precise timing. Get enough. Get it from quality sources. Spread it across the day. Let me also spend a moment on sleep, because I see so many people who are doing everything right in the gym and undermining all of it with inadequate sleep. Sleep is not passive. It is the primary anabolic window. Growth hormone is secreted in pulses during deep sleep. Cortisol regulation depends heavily on sleep quality and duration. Muscle protein synthesis is highest when you're asleep. If you are consistently getting fewer than 7 hours of quality sleep, you are leaving a massive amount of adaptation on the table, and you are increasing injury risk because your reaction time, coordination, and tissue repair are all compromised. I know sleep is complicated. I know life is demanding, but if you're serious about this, if you're really trying to build the physical foundation for a long, functional life, sleep has to be on the priority list alongside training and nutrition. Now I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier because I think it's worth spending real time on. The concept of training for the marginal decade. This is a mental model I find genuinely useful when thinking about why any of this matters. Your marginal decade is the last 10 or so years of your life. For most people, that decade looks dramatically worse than the decades before it. Energy is lower. Mobility is reduced. Falls become a real threat. Independence is compromised. We often think of this as just what aging looks like, the natural end stage. But the research does not support that framing. What we see in that marginal decade is very often the accumulated consequence of decades of physical underinvestment. The muscle mass that was never built or that was allowed to atrophy. The balance and stability that was never trained. The structural resilience that was never developed. The people who are vital, functional, and independent in their 80s and 90s, and they exist, they are real, they are not just genetic lottery winners. Those people almost universally have histories of consistent physical activity, and specifically of strength and resistance training. They have what I call a deeper reserve. When the inevitable decline of aging comes for them, they have so much more to lose before they reach the threshold of dysfunction. That is what we're building. We're not just trying to look good or feel good in our 40s and 50s, though both of those will happen. We are making deposits into a biological account that our future selves will desperately need to draw from. Let me give you a sample weekly structure so this doesn't feel abstract. Let's say you're training 4 days a week on a lower upper split. Monday is lower body. You start with your movement prep, hip mobility, glute activation, maybe some ankle work. Then you move into your primary strength work. Something like trap bar deadlifts, 3 to 4 sets of 5 to 8 reps with a challenging weight. Then you move to goblet squats or split squats, 3 sets of 8 to 10, then single leg work, step ups or single leg RDLs, 2 to 3 sets per side. Then you finish with some direct hamstring work, lying leg curls or Nordic hamstring curls if you have access, and maybe some loaded carries to close out. Total time, depending on your rest periods, somewhere between 45 and 70 minutes. Tuesday is upper body, movement prep, thoracic rotation, shoulder circles, primary strength work, dumbbell bench press or a barbell press, 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 10 reps. Then a horizontal row, chest supported dumbbell row or cable row, matching the volume of your push. Then overhead press, if your shoulders allow. Then lat pull downs or assisted pull ups. Then some accessory work, face pulls for rear deltoids and rotator cuff health, which I consider non-negotiable for shoulder longevity, and maybe some bicep and tricep work if you have time and energy. Again, 45 to 70 minutes. Wednesday is rest or active recovery. Walk, move, stretch. Don't sit on the couch all day, but don't train hard either. Let your body do the work of adapting. Thursday is lower body again, but with some variation. Maybe you shift from trap bar deadlifts to Romanian deadlifts as your primary hinge, and from goblet squats to a more loaded split squat or a box squat. Same patterns, slightly different stimulus. This is one of the beautiful things about a lower upper split. You can vary the specific exercises while keeping the patterns consistent, which lets you manage recovery while still hitting everything with adequate frequency. Friday is upper body, similar structure to Tuesday, but again with some variation in the specific exercises. Maybe this day you emphasize vertical pulling more, weighted pull-up progressions, or heavy lat pull-downs, and you do more row volume. Maybe you swap the flat bench for an incline dumbbell press. Keep the patterns, rotate the tools. Weekends are rest, walking, recreational activity, play. That matters too. Now I want to address something I hear a lot, especially from people who are returning to training after a long break or who are starting for the first time in their 40s or 50s. The question of where to begin when you don't feel like you're starting from zero, you're starting from a deficit. First, I want to say directly, it is never too late. The biology of adaptation is not age-gated. Your muscles will respond. Your strength will increase. Your body will change in response to the right stimulus, regardless of how long it's been or what your starting point is. Second, I want to say that your starting point should probably be more humble than your ego wants it to be. Ego, lifting, loading the bar beyond what you can handle with proper form because you think you should be stronger than this, is one of the most reliable paths to injury I know of. Check your ego. Move well first, load second. This is not a rule for beginners. This is a rule for everyone, always. Spend your first 4 to 6 weeks focused almost entirely on movement quality. Learn the squat pattern. Learn the hinge. Develop your feel for proper bracing, for creating tension through a movement, for controlling the eccentric, the lowering phase, which is where a huge portion of the training stimulus comes from and where a huge portion of injuries happen when people aren't paying attention. Use light loads. Move slowly. Build the neural pathways. This foundation is not a detour. It is the most direct route to long-term progress. One more thing I want to address, because I think it's genuinely important, and often overlooked. Training after 40 is not just about physical adaptation, it's also about the relationship you build with your body and with the practice of training. The people I've seen succeed over the long term are not the ones who started the most aggressively or who had the most impressive first 6 months. They're the ones who found a way to make training a non-negotiable part of their life, not a phase, not a program they're doing for a few months, but a practice that is as embedded in their routine as eating or sleeping. That requires that you actually enjoy it, or at least find deep meaning in it. It requires that you have goals that are bigger than aesthetics. It requires that you connect what you're doing in the gym to what you want your life to look like at 70, 80, and beyond. That connection, that clarity of purpose, is what keeps people going when motivation fluctuates, when life gets busy, when progress plateaus. I want to close with this. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what medicine can and cannot do for the way we age, and the honest answer is that pharmaceutical interventions, while valuable in certain contexts, have nothing on the effect size of the interventions you have complete control over right now. The way you move your body, the way you feed it, the way you rest it. The decisions you make today about strength training are not small decisions. They are decisions with decade-long consequences. They are decisions that will determine whether your later years are characterized by dependence and decline or by vitality and freedom. If you've made it this far in this video, you're clearly someone who takes this seriously. And I want to acknowledge that, because taking your health seriously, especially in a culture that normalizes physical decline as just a natural part of getting older, takes real conviction. The work ahead of you is not complicated. It doesn't require a perfect gym or expensive equipment or a personal trainer, though all of those things can help. It requires consistency, intentionality, and the understanding that every rep you do is an investment in a version of yourself that you haven't met yet, but that is counting on you. Start this week. Start today if you can. Pick 2 or 3 of the movements I talked about. Do them with good form at a manageable load. Come back next week and do a little more. That's the whole program. That is the secret. Not a perfect routine, a routine you actually do repeatedly over years with progressive intention. That is what builds the body that carries you well into old age. That is what gives you the marginal decade you deserve. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, share it with someone over 40 who needs to hear it. And if you have questions about any of the specifics, programming, nutrition, how to adapt this if you have a particular injury or limitation, drop them in the comments. I read them. Let's keep this conversation going.